It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. On various parts of the internet, Russell Brand is vanishing. Adverts have been removed from his lucrative YouTube account. The BBC has taken down programmes featuring him from its iPlayer and Sounds streaming services. Shows that were acceptable 10 years ago, no longer so. And I'm sure it's led lots of us, including me, to be honest, to question whether we should have been more vocal in calling out some of this comedy at the time, and to question why we weren't more offended by it. Perhaps it's a sign of how much things really have changed in recent years, and it was recent. I mean, we're not talking about the 1970s here. But the one thing that did cut through at the time was Sachsgate, a warning there is a bit of flash photography coming up now. Russell Brand was on BBC Radio 2 and he left offensive voicemails on the phone of the sitcom actor Andrew Sachs about Brand having sex with his granddaughter. But actually, you know, the more I think about it, the more I realise that Sachsgate was actually the perfect example of how things have changed. Two men, Brand and Jonathan Ross, talking to another man about a woman, Georgina Baillie. But the coverage at the time, though, was all about the impact on the men involved. Georgina was almost invisible. I mean, even the name of the scandal, Sachsgate, reflects that. Well, tonight, we're trying to readdress that balance because really, this is a story about a woman. Georgina Baillie has been talked about an awful lot in the last 10 years. She's been defined by what men have said about her. Well, on this show, she gets to talk. And I guess that in itself is some kind of progress. Now, there is some strong language coming up in my interview, but we've kept it in because, frankly, I feel it's important for Georgina to tell her story in her own words. Other people have spoken for her. This is her chance to speak for herself. Because you were thrown into the spotlight, right? Mm-hmm. When Russell Brand and Jonathan Ross left a series of offensive voicemails on your grandfather's phone. Do you sort of remember what they said?
Do you know what? It was such a long time ago, but it was just a really weird, situation where I didn't really feel connected to myself. I didn't know what was going on, and I just put myself wherever they told me to go. And yeah, I was in fight or flight. I was very, very, I wasn't very well in the head.
How did you first find out what happened?
So I was at work and Russell called me. I missed it because I was working, and he said, you better break into your grandparents' house because me and my naughty friend, Jonathan, and then I heard him cackling in the background, have left a message on his answering machine. And I was like, oh, God, here we go. Because I already had a strained relationship with them because at that time I was going through a lot of... I had undiagnosed mental health issues, and I also, was on the way to becoming a full-blown addict. And, yeah, it was horrible.
Yeah. And he was, I guess, treating it as a joke.
Yeah, well, it was. It was. And I was a joke. I was a joke to everybody, and I dared to open my mouth. But she doesn't matter because look at her, I was the unknown being kissed and told on, and my biggest mistake was talking about it. I shouldn't have said a word because at that time they would twist everything in the men's favour. So Russell went off and did a tour all about it, and there I was, couldn't get a job, couldn't get a day clean and sober. It was really rubbish.
What really struck me about the time, and I really remember the story, we're the sort of same age, I remember what a big story it was.
We are the same age.
Exactly the same age. But it was all told through the lens of the men involved.
Yeah.
It was told about the impact on your grandfather and not really about the impact on you. Mm-hmm. Did you sort of feel that?
Well, I mean, yeah, I do. I have managed to say my piece a few times, and I think as the years have gone by, my words are twisted less and less. At the time, I wasn't able to say anything because I knew that they would sew together what they wanted so that they got the narrative. And so I just feel like it was just total slut shaming, you know, the big scarlet S on me. And, oh, well, but it doesn't matter. Boys will be boys because she's a slut. So it's fine. It doesn't matter who her grandfather is. And really, I could be the biggest slut in the entire world and it would still be wrong, what they're doing. They bullied my grandfather, who was a sweet old man, didn't deserve it, didn't ask for it. I wish that I had never told Russell who he was, because I didn't need to.
Mm-hmm. 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 It feels to me like Russell Brand almost made money out of what happened.
He did.
But it impacted your career in a negative way.
Well, I mean, at the time, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, you know, so I had to spend 10 years trying to figure that out. And luckily, Adamant gave me a job in his band, so that was really nice. It put some distance between being the Sachsgate girl and the present in that time. So that was during my mid-20s, and then that sort of dried up, and then I went to drama school, and that's where, like, the drink and the drugs really became a problem.
YouTube have today stopped Russell Brand being able to make money out of his videos on YouTube.
Really?
Do you think that's a good thing? Or do you
No.
think it's cancel culture?
No, it's cancel culture because, look, Russell made a mistake when he was younger, right? And when he made his amends to me, he looked me in the eye, apologised and said, you know, he wasn't working a programme. And as an addict in recovery, I understand where he's coming from. So what happens with addiction is you can cross-addict onto other things. So if you put down, let's say, I don't know, heroin, you might pick up a behaviour addiction if you're not working a programme, like bulimia or sex addiction. And so obviously, Russell was newly clean and sober, fairly newly clean and sober, and I think it's very common for people to cross-addict into sex addiction. And when he made his amends to me, I felt like he took full ownership of that.
Because he did say sorry to you, right?
He looked me in the eyes and apologised, and he also sent me to rehab, you know, so that's all I can ask.
Have you forgiven him?
I have, yeah. That's all I can ask of somebody in recovery that's working the same steps that I am.
How about the BBC? Because it feels to me like this is the other part of the story, right? He was almost encouraged by some of the media companies and some of the production companies around him. Do you forgive the BBC?
I don't really care about them. They don't take up any airspace in my mind.
Are you glad that there's investigations going on into some of his behaviour?
Anybody that's been a victim of sexual abuse needs justice. I don't know what happened there. I don't know because I wasn't there. He never did anything like that with me. Everything was more than consensual, I promise. But I've seen some of the evidence and I do find it quite compelling, to say the least.
Do you believe them? I know it's hard to...
I can't really say, I don't have all the evidence.
But you find it compelling?
I do.
Yeah.
I find it compelling and we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, yeah, that does make sense. We've been talking a bit about what happened to you and the attitudes at the time. Do you think things have got better?
Yeah. If it were to happen now, his career would be over. And so would Jonathan Ross's, who is the one that I actually have more of a problem with.
Really?
Yeah.
And why is that?
Because he never saw fit to talk to me.
So he hasn't apologised?
He never said a word, and I think he will never say a word because I'm a slut, I'm not important, right?
That's interesting that he hasn't apologised to you.
No.
I'd assumed, to be completely honest, that he had.
No, he apologised to my granddad because he's respectable, but I'm just some girl who did a kiss and tell in his eyes.
So he apologised to your granddad, but not to you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you like him to apologise now?
I don't care about him enough. But yeah, I guess I would just some sort of acknowledgement would be nice, you know, because I feel like I don't matter, you know, and that is part of the shame that comes with addiction. You know, I've had to do a lot of very hard work to get to where I am mentally, and I think a lot of things have been brushed under the carpet, and it's time to get them out.
Well, you're doing that now.
I am. I quite like it, even though this is a lovely carpet.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Georgina Baillie, there? Well, we can bring in our duo for tonight, the Conservative MP, former Minister Andrea Jenkyns, and Ash Sarkar, who is a contributing editor to Novara Media. Thanks for being with us. I find that a really fascinating interview, actually. She doesn't want to be a victim, and I get that. I get that. But she's obviously been hugely impacted by what happened to her and, you know, the way that she was made to feel like she'd done something wrong, obviously. She was caught up in this storm that she had no control over. It has made me really kind of reflect on how I think things have changed. I don't know what you think.
I really hope that things have changed, and I think that Me Too did change some of the ways in which media understands these stories, because at that time it was seen as an offence against the grandfather. Yeah. So how dare you kind of besmirch his honour by talking about how you had sex with his granddaughter? And the fact that this was a violation of a woman's confidence, taking her sexuality and then making it this hugely exposed public commodity. I mean, the way she was talking about I guess feeling like she lacked connection with herself, that she was just going where people told her to. I mean, that to me just sounds like a very typical trauma response, that classic dissociation. And I think that the media really did participate in dehumanising her. I think that Jonathan Ross and Russell Brand were responsible for the initial violation, but then the media really did help violate her over and over again.
I think it was interesting when she said that Jonathan Ross had apologised to her granddad, but not to her. I thought that was quite telling.
Yes, and I mean, it must have really impacted the family. I mean, I'm very close in my family. Yeah. Having recently lost my mum as well, and what it must have did to her, you know, we all like to be the apple of our parents and grandparents are. It must have really affected her.
And I think it did impact her family relations, which is, again, you can see that
absolutely.
in the... Yeah.
Now, what really concerns me, though, is the wider issue with the BBC. You know, have they potentially allowed another cover-up like they did with Jimmy Savile? Now, I have to say, I do believe in innocent until proven guilty, you know, like where we saw the situation with Hugh Edwards and Philip Schofield. I didn't come out lambasting them. I didn't do death by social media, which we so often see on social media, don't we, Sophie? But with serious allegations like that, you know, if there is the evidence, then I think the police should be seriously looking into this. And if it's proven to be true, then something's got to happen.
We were having a bit of a chat before off camera, and Ash, I thought it was quite interesting what you were saying about your experience of, you know, being a young woman around this time. Like, how old would you have been?
Well,
15 years ago, so...
15 years ago.
Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here.
I would have been about 16, and, you know, I mean, my mum knows all this already, right? When I was a teenager, I was sneaking into clubs, and I wanted to be a part of this really creative indie scene.
Russell Brand scene.
It was a very Russell Brand scene. So I never had any interactions with him, but it was like that kind of guy. So maybe artistic, creative, a bit more effeminate, less macho. And it was a scene where it was just crowded by teenage girls like me and guys who were in their mid to late 20s or 30s. And it was normal to experience severe violations of your boundaries in terms of I'm talking about in terms of sexual harassment, sexual assault, the things which I saw, that I heard of, that I experienced. Now, at the age of 31, I look back on with complete horror, and that was kind of normalised in the culture. So in terms of the evidence that was presented by Dispatches and Sunday Times, I find the evidence they presented credible, but more than that, the account of one of the women going by the pseudonym Alice, the way she talked about being fetishised for her age.
16-year-old we're talking about.
As a 16-year-old, that rang so true of that cultural moment for me.
It's so interesting.
I was 34 at the time, so nearly twice your age. And I just remember looking at him and thinking, an unsavoury character he came across, and needs a good wash, actually, Sophie.
You had an email.
Oh, God, yeah.
Go on, tell us the story.
Well, I mean, it's probably a hoax. I assumed it was a hoax at the time.
It could be a hoax.
I assumed it was a hoax. A couple of days after I got elected, you know, when I stood against Ed Balls and won the election, I got an email from a Rusty Rocket Gmail address and saying about my win and about meeting up and everything, and I just assumed it was a hoax, and I actually didn't think about it until the last few days.
And what did the email say?
I can't remember. I mean, we're talking it was about well done on your win and about meeting. That's what I recall.
Trying to meet.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it potentially was a hoax. I assumed it was a hoax because I don't know him from Adam.
Yeah. Definitely want to look into now. Whether
Potentially.
Yeah.
Or maybe not.
or maybe not. Exactly. Yeah. Probably not actually.
Yeah, I
And maybe
think
leave
so.
that one.
Yes, absolutely.
Really interesting to talk. Thanks for sort of sharing your experiences as well. We'll have lots more from Andrea and Ash later in the show. But next, Keir Starmer has ended his mini world tour, an outing on the global stage that his aides will hope sell him as a Prime Minister in waiting. Well, last week he was in The Hague giving details of a new plan to tackle illegal migration that could bring closer ties with the European Union. And then he moved on to Canada at a conference of progressive leaders from across the world, including the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and talked from Labour that they would seek a better deal with the European Union. Today, he was in Paris for a prestigious meeting with the French President Emmanuel Macron, but it's rumblings out of Brussels tonight about the UK potentially being offered associate membership of the EU at a future date that's perhaps signalled the political perils for Starmer in reopening the Brexit debate. Well, Sky's Ali Fortescue has been in Paris with the Labour leader today. She joins us now. Ali, now I know you're about to dash to get the Eurostar back home, but before you do, we won't keep you too long. There's been a lot of talk about Starmer sounding a bit warmer about the EU, but are the EU about to get warmer about him?
Yeah, I mean, I think that has been the most fascinating question here today. As you say, just to kind of put it into context, this is the end of his big world tour, the Netherlands, Canada. He's just left Paris. What's been fascinating from Labour the last few days is we've seen kind of bolder position when it comes to Europe, a willingness, I think, to talk about things the way they didn't necessarily want to talk about before. I think the sense you get is they want to thrash out some of these issues before a general election. That obviously does open them up to potential criticism, as I'll come to in my piece. But as you say, the most interesting thing really has been the response on the French side, the speculation, open speculation here, that under Keir Starmer there could be close relations between Europe and the UK, and as you say, this idea of associate membership that obviously, is very early days, nothing's happened yet, there's nothing that Labour have talked about at all, but this would be, I think, hugely significant. And sorry, there's just someone coming in shot. But what has been the most fascinating thing is the symbolism here in France, which I think the French side have said is more than just symbolism, is actually been about something concrete, and a French president that you get the sense, even though the Elysee really didn't want to kind of lean into this meeting or release too many pictures, you do get the sense that this is about more than symbolism on the French side.
Arriving in Paris, the man who wants to be the next Prime Minister. Keir Starmer enjoying a French business breakfast before the main event. A meeting behind closed doors with President Macron. No press allowed, just 2 photos released to prove it happened. This is a Keir Starmer Labour want you to see.
Do you think the French president wants to get to know you privately, not publicly?
We had a very constructive and positive meeting, which, as you can imagine, covered a wide range of issues on my mind and on the President's mind, and to discuss ideas about how we would improve the relationship between our two countries, and for me to put on the table my ideas if we're privileged enough to win the election.
The French side keen not to endorse an opposition leader, but it seems the meeting went well.
This was a 45-minute one-on-one meeting. That is rare for the French president. And gifts were exchanged. From the Labour leader, there was an Arsenal shirt, and from President Macron, some cufflinks. There's no doubt it's a good look for the man who wants to be the next Prime Minister. The bigger question, though, and the bigger challenge will be when it comes to his foreign policy.
And on policy, Keir Starmer has been bolder, opening himself up to attacks over claims he could secure a better Brexit deal, and a government keen to paint him as a Europhile.
Do you think Paris thinks that Keir Starmer could be more open to a close relationship with Europe?
I think that in French eyes, the fact that he didn't vote for Brexit definitely, counts for something. Particularly when it comes to defence and security, that sort of strategic culture the British have is missing. So I think that a structured dialogue, Keir Starmer's put that on the table, that kind of thing is very valuable, could be very valuable for the French.
An entente cordiale is one thing, but it's the view at home that matters.
I would do a much better job.
In places like West Yorkshire.
Well, he's probably trying to cement a bit of future for himself, but yeah, no, it's not his place at the moment.
I think that there are opportunities for improving. There are opportunities, for new deals, new negotiations. Doesn't necessarily mean that we have to stay directly away from Brexit, but there are ways that we can improve it.
President Macron's not the first world leader Keir Starmer has courted, and he's not the first opposition leader to do so. Tony Blair famously got on with Bill Clinton before entering number 10. David Cameron met with President Obama. But it's a sign that Paris are looking ahead at the man who could well be the next Prime Minister. Ali Fortescue, Sky News, Paris.
Coming up next on the Politics Hub, Keir Starmer's Paris trip has predictably caused uproar from Brexiteers who say the Labour leader is considering taking Brexit negotiations back to square one. Just what is the Labour leader up to? We'll ask his shadow business secretary. That's next.
You know, it's amazing how little we know about what's going on next door in their very community. In fact, maybe someone living right next door to you at this moment could have been promised the world by someone in this country who says, come to the UK, I'm going to look after you, I'm going to provide you with good education, food that you can actually give to your family and everything else. And when you arrive, they take away your only means of escape, your passport. And every single promise that they made, they didn't live up to it. And I think we need to create awareness of exactly that fact, that this is going on in our doorsteps and nothing is being done about it.
The numbers are very much rising, and that's why organisations like Causeway and others around the country kind of exist to support those marginalised and vulnerable communities, because this is an issue that is rising. It's not going away anytime soon, unfortunately.
Creating the awareness of what Causeway is all about is really important. That's why I've got involved, because I realise in the same way with health and fitness, unless you create the awareness of what to do or what you can possibly do to make a change, make a difference, no one ever does anything about it. So I think that what should happen is that we keep on ploughing away, we keep on doing these interviews, we keep on highlighting the figures, although it's 136,000 people in this country, potentially that we know of, could be modern day slavery. Across the world, it's a lot more than that. I've seen it in Jamaica, where the promise of better life is offered to people. They get taken in, and then all of a sudden they can't get out that easily. They don't get what was promised to them.
Modern slavery is being lumped in as an immigration issue under this bill. Now, fundamentally, modern slavery is a criminal exploitation issue. These are vulnerable people that are being used for other people's gain in ways that we cannot even comprehend the kind of trauma that they're experiencing. I think as long as their political rhetoric includes modern slavery as an immigration issue and not a criminal, vulnerable people issue, we tread a dangerous line in terms of our national effort to protect and support these people.
Welcome back. This is the Politics Hub, where each night we give you a front row seat on all of the day's political drama. Now, just before the break, we were talking about Keir Starmer's trip to Paris to meet the French President today. Well, joining us in the studio is the Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds.
Good evening.
Thank you for being with us. Now, I'm keen to talk about EU, about the kind of big trip by Keir Starmer, but first I just want to talk to you about Russell Brand. And I know this has been brought up before, but, you know, this is the first chance I've had to talk to a Labour politician about it, because Ed Miliband, of course, was interviewed by Russell Brand in 2015. And I just want to look at the timeline of this because, of course, Sachsgate, that we've been hearing from Georgina Baillie about on the programme, happened in 2008. So that was known then. I just want to play you a little bit of the interview with Ed Miliband and Russell Brand before that election in 2015.
Within the current political paradigm, we do have no choice. This feeling, which I suppose Nigel Farage capitalises on, of like, ordinary people aren't, it doesn't seem like there's a real choice, so that in the end when someone with a pint on their head turns up, it seems like a valid and interesting
I'm not planning to do
alternative.
that.
No, I don't think that's not your speech.
I'm not sure I'd look so good with a pint on my head.
I don't think either of us would benefit from a balancing act at this moment.
Exactly.
Unless it's a sort of an economical balancing act, Ed, which is something that we really need to look at.
It's uncomfortable viewing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I would specifically say, looking at the events of the last week, if any person who has very bravely come forward and talked about what has happened to them felt, that interview made that worse in some way, I would regret that very much.
Would you apologise to them?
Yeah, I would, yeah. I'd say, in hindsight, looking at that, I wish that never happened.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because I've been thinking about it as well. Because weirdly, you look at some of the stuff that happened, and I'm not talking about the kind of criminal allegations that he denies, but I'm just talking about the general culture that was out there, the stuff that he was doing that we did all know about. And I guess you do kind of question why you didn't, and I'm not talking about you specifically, I'm just talking about everybody, including myself. Why we weren't more offended by it at the time? Why we didn't say something then?
It's horrifying. I mean, it's absolutely horrifying. And you can say it's a different time, but then it doesn't seem that long ago, really, to be honest. It doesn't feel that way. So I think if all of us give some thought to that and reflect a little bit, that's not a bad thing. But I, would say clearly what we would all, I think, want to see now is people supported, people coming forward, recognising the bravery. It will not have been easy to do this, and I hope a criminal justice aspect to this as well.
Was it a mistake to do that interview?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, OK.
But to be honest, I don't want to make it sound like this is about the 2015 election. I mean, this is obviously about the victims and the process today, but yes, I wish that never happened.
Right, let's talk about the EU, shall we? Let's talk about Keir Starmer. There's a suggestion coming from Europe, and particularly the French, that there could be a sort of revamped EU, if you like, by kind of 2030, where Britain could be offered the option of associate membership status. What do you think of that idea?
Well, that's not what we're interested in. So we have always made clear we think the deal has to be better, that there are major gaps in that deal. We were specific about where we want to see that improvement made. Now, even the government did move on the Horizon Science programme, which we always said British universities and scientists should be a part of it.
But specifically on associate membership status, why don't you want that? Isn't that the best of all worlds? You don't have to sign up to all of the EU, but you just get a closer relationship.
The first thing I'd say is
right?
the kind of things we want to see, so for instance, an agreement, what we call a veterinary agreement based on agri-food products. You don't need to be a member of the single market for that. New Zealand has one, so that's clearly available. The other things like the recognition of professional qualifications or a labour mobility agreement, look, I think those are deliverable. I honestly believe, first of all, that you've got to respect the result of that referendum, but also if you look at the huge uncertainty, the frequent chopping and changing of government policy for the last 13 years. I don't just mean around Europe, but on a whole range of areas. That is at the heart of why we have such low business investment in this country, why we are not seeing the kind of economy people want in terms of good jobs, good wages, prosperity in all parts of the country. And reliving this particular argument, maybe forever. I know people are unhappy with how it has gone. The polls say that very clearly.
We're not
that
reliving
shouldn't be
the
mistaken.
argument. I mean, Keir Starmer is over there talking to, European leaders. You say that you want a closer relationship, and the French have put this potentially on the table.
That's great to see a potential leader of this country who could engage with partners to address the problems that we're facing, whether that's illegal migration or economic policy. You've got to have a good faith relationship with your neighbours, and I think the rest of the world would breathe a sigh of relief to get rid of this Conservative government and have, again, a government they feel they could do business with. And Keir's making that point today, and I think it's going well.
Has Brexit been a success?
Well, it depends what people wanted out of it. In terms of if you wanted a pure definition of sovereignty, of not pooling that in an aggregate basis with the European nations, I think you might say it's a success. If you believed it would solve every economic problem this country has or somehow would lead to a situation where you could erect trade barriers with your closest trading market and that wouldn't have a negative effect, you will be disappointed with the promises you were given within there. But I would honestly say whichever position you took on it, let's look to the future, because I think that deal can be improved, and I think I voted Remain, but I never thought that in itself, being a member of the European Union, solved all the economic problems or the problems of this country. And equally, the idea we can't address them without reliving that whole argument, I don't think is accurate either.
OK. I want to talk to you about the doctor strike, because there's going to be so many of our viewers who this is the thing right now that they're worried about that's impacting them. Because what we're seeing is a double doctor strike. Consultants walking out, and then from tomorrow morning, junior doctors joining them. Do you support that strike?
Look, I don't think anyone goes to work for an organisation like the NHS and wants to go on strike. Strikes in the NHS are relatively rare. The fact that this government, well, not under this government, no. And we should take a lesson from that. And I do believe if the government were to adopt the policy we've got, so it's scrapping the non-dom tax regime for the super rich, use that revenue to address the NHS workforce issues and specifically the workload. I know pay is the top line issue here, but I think if that issue around workload were addressed, I think that would go somewhere to solving the dispute.
Hang on, sorry. So you're saying that investing £2.6 billion in the NHS and not moving on pay would stop the strikes?
I think in any strike, you see some movement on pay. It's not the top line request. No, but I think what you saw at the beginning of all these different pieces of industrial action in the public services was the government, I think, thinking, OK, we've got maybe an alibi here. We've absolutely wrecked most public services over the last 13 years, but hey, we can blame the workforce and the strikes for the situation that they are in. And that hasn't worked. And actually, they've had to move, even though they didn't want to. They've had to move.
What would you do on pay?
I'd sit down and talk to them. And it wouldn't be the top line request.
What would you say if you sat down and talked?
It's impossible to not be part of that negotiation and give a figure. But I believe if there was movement and there was the key issue of workload addressed at the same time, with a policy like we've got or some other thing the government wanted to come forward with, I do think, when I talk to people who will be on strike tomorrow, people in my constituency, I don't think they want this to go on forever. I think they want a resolution. But the government has had to move, and it should have the humility to say, we didn't get it right at the beginning. Let's sit round and sort this out. That's what everybody wants.
Just finally, Diane Abbott, suspended from the Labour Party after being accused of anti-Semitism. She has accused Keir Starmer of crashing democracy by the investigation into her. What's your response to that?
I would reject that entirely. We've had some issues to sort out in the Labour Party. We wouldn't be where we are as a potential next government of this country if we hadn't addressed them. Diane had a well-publicised incident that resulted in the disciplinary action that has happened. You know, she did that. No one forced her to write that letter. There's a process that's now followed. People will know, I think, following the EHRC report to the Labour Party, there was a big change to our disciplinary processes. It has removed a sort of political element of that. It's an independent process. I don't know where any investigation is at, even as a leading member of the Shadow Cabinet. That's how it should be. So I don't know where that investigation is at, but I do think the public expect political parties to exercise high standards and to police those standards.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Great to have you on the programme today. Thank you. Jonathan Reynolds there speaking to us on the Politics Hub. Well, coming up next, plenty to discuss from that interview with Jonathan Reynolds there, including, of course, Labour's position on the EU. And we've got just the women to do that. Andrea Jenkyns and Ash Sarkar are next. Welcome back to The Politics Hub. We're your source for all of the day's political news and analysis. Now, before the break, we were just talking to Labour's Jonathan Reynolds. We can get a bit of reaction from our panel now, Andrea and Ash. What's going on with Labour and Brexit? Ash, I'm interested in what you think. Is this a sensible move by Keir Starmer, showing that he is prepared to get closer ties to the EU, to get a better deal, or are Labour basically walking into one big elephant trap before the election?
OK, I've got some good stuff and some bad stuff. All right, the good stuff is that I think this is broadly coherent with what Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are saying about growth. And in their view, they think by having a closer relationship with the EU, bit more regulatory alignment, there'll be better trading relations, and that will be good for UK growth. And the things that he's doing now in order to try and make that happen, signalling that he'll be a closer friend to the EU, that he's not going to do that kind of Liz Truss posturing of saying, oh, are you friend, are you foe? I think that's totally in line with that. The interesting thing was seeing Jonathan Reynolds respond to your question about would this mean that a Labour government would be in favour of an associate member status in something like 2030? The thing I would say is that when you look at Keir Starmer's record of changing his mind on pledges that he's just made, I mean, he really is king of the 180. You can't really trust that the thing he says today is going to be the same thing that he says in 2 years' time. I mean, when he was shadow Brexit secretary under Corbyn, he was instrumental in taking the party towards a second referendum, more pro-Remain position. When he was running for Labour Party leader, he was saying, we're going to defend free movement. He made all sorts of economic pledges.
Is this just good politics?
And then
should we just expect this from politicians? They want to win an election. Fair enough.
I say it's good politics for the politician, it's not good politics for the country. And I would broadly say it's a bad sign when politicians break their promises before they even get into power.
I can see you nodding along with some of that.
I never thought we'd do that tonight. I mean, look, I don't see how somebody can go from being a Corbynista to trying to be the heir to Blair. This is, in my books, a man who hasn't got any conviction. And I was there in the voting lobby trying to defend Brexit and save Brexit on the never-ending Groundhog Day. He was the one who was trying to stop Brexit. So I can see he's trying to be a master politician by appeal to the red wall seats by saying we're not taking you in. But that's not true, because I think actually what we've seen with meeting Macron and the stuff that we're hearing coming out, he wants free movement. Clearly, he does. He wants also closer alignment.
To be fair,
yeah,
it's not what he says.
No, but clearly that's
and he's
to me
also
where his
ruled
heart
out
is.
The single market and customs union.
Yes, but as Ash says, which I agree, is flip-flopped and changed his mind previously. So how can we trust that?
What do you think about how this government has been with Brexit? Do you think that this government has made a success of Brexit?
Look, I was Theresa May's biggest critic. In my own party, I called for her to publicly resign in PMQs, Sophie. So I've fought like tooth and nail. I've got a very Leave seat. And I think that, very sadly, we haven't been able to make the most of Brexit that we could have done, the opportunities as post-trade. We've done as best as we could, but we didn't expect, COVID to be in the way and investing all this, having to spend all this extra money, which would have gone into, further investment. We had to save people's jobs, quite rightly. And we had to come up with vaccines, and now we've got the war in Ukraine. And don't forget, it's not that long ago, Sophie. It was 2019 we was having some of this Groundhog Day. Do you remember when Boris first took over, was talk about potentially proroguing Parliament to try and get Brexit
What about Rishi Sunak? Because obviously you're kind of Boris believer. I remember you on the streets of Downing Street, one of the kind of his fan base, if you like, there till the end. Yeah. Are you a bit disappointed in Rishi Sunak and how he's
Look, I've never purported to be a big fan of Rishi Sunak. However, I'd much rather be him in number 10 than Labour and Keir Starmer.
What did you make about Jonathan Reynolds' comments on Diane Abbott?
So I really have to disagree with him there, because when you look at Diane Abbott's letter, which she just published, one of the things that she says is that the investigation into her conduct got moved to Labour HQ, directly controlled by Keir Starmer, and then nothing's happened. And there is a clear difference between how she's been treated. She wrote a letter which I think had some really offensive content. She immediately apologised. She still suspended from the Labour whip, whereas Neil Coyle, who made some very racially derogatory comments to a journalist, he's just had the Labour whip restored. So either I think you treat all matters of racism the same and you treat it with the same disciplinary process, there are the same punishments for bad behaviour, or you kind of have to throw your hands up and admit that you take one form of racism a lot more seriously than another. And I just think that's morally abhorrent.
OK. Thank you very much indeed. Lively discussion. Now, this show shares a name with our digital politics hub, which I'm just walking over to right now. It's basically like our giant on-set iPhone, as you can see. And now we've been across all of today's political developments. It's constantly being updated among them. We break this story from the Department for Education, which gives an update on the number of schools affected by the ruck concrete, a story that we've covered a lot on the Politics Hub. Now, there's been an increase of 27 since the last release, which means a total of 174 education settings, schools now having been identified as having the concrete. And you can click through as well to see the full list if you're interested. Let's have a look at another story. This has been rumbling on for a while. Nigel Farage's bank account and his claim that he was debanked because of his political views. Now, the city regulator, the FCA, has found no evidence that the problem is widespread. Debanking, as it were. It's a bit of a tongue twister for me from Daryl there, my producer. Ms Farage has responded by saying that the FCA are part of the problem. Plus, here is an inquiry into an immigration centre near Gatwick Airport, identified as having prison-like conditions. Brick House was found to be not sufficiently decent, secure or caring for detained people or its staff, and it found 19 incidents of mistreatment that took place between April and August 2017. If you scan the QR code on your screen, you can catch up with all of the latest on the Hub throughout the day. Now, I'm going to take you back to the desk. There we go, not the guest. Now, the government's plan for net zero has come under a bit of attack in recent months from within the Conservative Party and beyond. And there's an update tonight on whether Rishi Sunak is going to hold his nerve. So we can bring in our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. What's the update?
So, after the surprise victory by the Tories just before the summer holidays in the Uxbridge by-election, Rishi Sunak has been reviewing all the net zero, the climate obligations of this government. And to be honest, I think Whitehall sources are saying tonight that we could get an update on his thinking in the next few days, so before the conference season gets underway in earnest. Now, we know the big picture conclusion because Claire Coutinho, the new Energy Secretary, told us in an article in The Sun at the weekend. The two headlines are that the government will keep the net zero by 2050 commitment that it has made, the big headline commitment that countries all around the world have been signing up to. But they will also make another commitment that there will be no additional financial burdens on hardworking families and they won't require them to change the way that they operate. So I think that's the big picture of what what Rishi Sunak is going to announce this week.
Really interesting. How do you think it's going to go down?
Well, it all depends on the detail. Now, if you want to achieve net zero, there are two big things that you've got to look at. One is to do with vehicles and the other is to do with how you heat your home. So on boilers, currently we use gas boilers. In order to achieve net zero, you'd need to probably move away from that. And the government at the moment has some quite ambitious targets that new homes wouldn't have gas boilers from 2025, that you wouldn't install any new gas boilers from 2035. Now, they've long been in the crosshairs of some. I think they could be watered down in the next few days. When it comes to cars, it sounds like the government is going to move on the promise to stop new cars that have diesel or petrol engines being sold from 2030. Now, this is the big surprise. This is what the BBC are saying this evening. And it will be quite a big moment if they do that, because quite a lot of investment has gone into electric car manufacturers under the promise of that 2030 target that would drive more electric cars being...
be pushed back, is what you're saying.
That target could be pushed back. There'll be a wider package of measures that will include not getting rid of oil boilers for rural seats. But I think this will be the first major moment where the government's rolled back on climate commitments, which Rishi Sunak thinks he needs to do politically and will please his backbenchers, but environmentalists will say this is Britain no longer having a path to meeting its net zero obligations.
Really interesting. Well, let's find out, shall we, if it is going to please some of his MPs. We can bring in Andrea Nash here. I'm interested to know your thoughts on this, Andrea. What would you welcome? You just listened to what Sam was saying there about potential rolling back on some of the green targets.
God, 1,000,000%. I mean, in my Redwall Northern seat, they don't buy the net zero. To me, you know, if it's not only the freedom argument, it's the economic argument. To me, people were told what to do in lockdown. We shouldn't tell them how to heat their home, what cars to drive. You know, so as a freedom-loving Conservative, that's, you know, I find that very excellent. But besides that, the economic argument, you know, I don't want to make people poorer. I don't want the working-class voters to have to pay for the middle classes to drive their electric cars, Sophie.
Yeah, I think that's a load of nonsense, really. I think the thing that people care about is cost of living, and a lot of these green measures would make things cheaper. If we had an adequate insulation programme in this country, we've got some of the leakiest housing stock in Europe. That would bring down people's energy costs.
But insulation's not the same as green energy.
I listen to you very patiently, so you've got to listen to me now. If we keep people reliant on fossil fuels, which are subject to the kind of external shocks that we've seen with the war in Ukraine, which sent people's gas bills soaring, we're more vulnerable than if we've got domestically produced green energy, whether that's solar, whether that's wind, whether that's hydro. There may need to be some nuclear capacity so that we're at that base load, but I think that we can be moving a lot faster to have a decarbonised energy grid than we are. And the thing which winds me up is that we've had a decade of wasted opportunities. We had interest rates at historic lows. It would have been very cheap for the government to borrow. But then Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng crashed the economy into a wall, and now it's going to be a lot more expensive to do those things. We keep kicking the can down the road. We keep booting this problem into the long grass, hoping it will get better, and it won't. And you know the thing about cost of living, that's going to get worse with climate change.
Look, what did the Labour government actually do in this area? You know, they was in power for, you know, more than a decade, so I have to disagree with you there, Ash. And I agree it's about the cost of living, and you know, I've been speaking to some businesses. Businesses have had to jump through hoops. Some have gone bankrupt to try and actually meet these targets. And it's just wrong. You know, the economy has been trashed through the war in Ukraine and also COVID. You know, we actually need to...
And your last party leader.
Oh, no, you cannot say that. She's actually been proven right with her economics, actually. But also, you know, the country and globally have been through these unprecedented times. You've got to allow the country to recover economically, and you don't do that by actually putting more measures in place that make people poorer and actually where they've got to change the heating system, change the cars. You know, I've got nothing against actually looking at different resources, because to me, for energy security, that's so important.
Quick thought, Ash, because we're running out of time.
I mean, very quickly, we're seeing the impact of climate change on food prices now with olive oil and tomatoes. That's going to get worse. And unless Britain does absolutely everything it can to reduce its share of the carbon budget, we're going to see that get worse.
You know what? Big disagreement, but respectful. That's what we're all about. Big range of views from the Politics Hub, but respectfully done.